All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at, well, I guess it's a pretty big question, right?
Definitely a big one. Yeah.
Can AI be an author? I mean, like legally under U.S. copyright law.
And it's not just theoretical anymore.
Right. We've got this court case, Thaler v. Perlmutter, just came down from the D.C. Circuit in 2025. So, like, we're not messing around. This is real-world stuff.
Absolutely real world implications. And in this deep dive, what we're going to do, we're going to really unpack the court's decision.
Yeah, break it down.
Break it down, the why, the how, the implications, especially for all this AI generated content that's, well, it's exploding, isn't it?
It's everywhere. Yeah.
But we're going to do it without, getting too lost in the weeds, the legalese. We're going to focus on the Thaler v. Perlmutter opinion itself, really get into the core,
Reasoning.
the meat of it.
Exactly. So by the end, you'll have a much clearer picture of what this all means.
All right, so let's get into it. So this case, it's about Dr. Stephen Thaler, and he's got this AI.
And it's got a great name. The creativity machine, right?
The creativity machine. Perfect name.
Makes sense. And this machine, this AI, it created a piece of art autonomously
All on its own?
called A Recent Entrance to Paradise. And here's the kicker. When Dr. Thaler goes to apply for copyright registration, he doesn't put himself down as the author.
Nope, not at all. He does something really interesting. He lists the creativity machine, the AI, as the sole author.
Wow.
Himself. Just the owner. Like, think about it like registering a car.
You own it, but you didn't build it.
Exactly. So obviously, the U.S. Copyright Office, they're not quite ready for this.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They've got this, pretty long-standing rule. You got to have a human author for copyright.
Yeah.
So they deny Dr. Thaler's application.
Makes sense, kind of following the precedent.
Yeah, sticking to their guns. So then Dr. Thaler, he's not giving up. He challenges this in federal district court. And, well, the court upholds the Copyright Office's decision. Still no AI authors.
So round one to the Copyright Office.
Round one, yeah. But Dr. Thaler, he takes it up another notch, appeals it to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And that's what we're really focused on today, that decision.
So this huge question, the one at the heart of it all, is can a machine, a non-human machine, be an author under the Copyright Act of 1976? It seems kind of basic, but man, the implications are enormous, especially with AI getting so good at creative stuff.
Huge, yeah. And the court, they said no, a pretty definitive no. And they based this mostly on the actual text of the Copyright Act. They looked at different sections and they're like, look, this all points to needing a human author.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics, the sections they looked at. They did a real close reading, right? So first up, Section 201A, which is all about ownership. What they find important there?
Well, they zeroed in on the word vests. The law says copyright vests in the author. And they're like, hold on, vests means you're getting a right, a title, something like that. And for that to happen, legally speaking, you got to be able to hold that right, like, own property. And their point is machines right now, legally, they're not the same as people. They can't sign contracts. They can't own things the same way. So the court says if a machine can't legally own stuff like we can, it can't be an author the way the Copyright Act means it.
Makes sense. Like, imagine a piece of software in court trying to defend its copyright. It's kind of hard to picture.
Yeah, bit of a legal gray area.
Then they looked at how long copyright lasts, right? Those sections. 302A, C, and E.
Yep. And the Copyright Act, usually it ties copyright to the author's life plus 70 years. There are fixed terms for some things, like anonymous works or work for hire stuff, but those are still like 95 or 120 years. And what the court says is these time frames, they're all about human lifespans or fixed calendars, machines. They don't fit into that. They even mentioned how the Copyright Office, they keep track of when authors die so they know when the copyright ends.
Yeah, makes sense for people.
But for a machine.
Right. Can't exactly have a death certificate for software.
Exactly.
So next up, inheritance.
Yeah.
Right. Section 203A, 2, and A. How does that fit in?
This is where the act's really human-centric. These sections are about termination rights, the ability to kind of undo a copyright transfer after a while. And these rights, they can go to the author's widow or widower, their children, their grandchildren.
Family stuff.
Totally family stuff, human connections, machines, that they don't have any of that. So the law, it's really picturing a human creator and their family.
It's built around that whole idea. Okay, what about actually transferring copyright ownership? Section 204A.
So that section, it says any transfer has to be written down and signed by the owner. And again, the court's point is machines can't do that. They can't sign legally. So again, the law assumes you've got a human who can handle those legal things.
It's like the whole system's built on the idea of a human author. They even talked about nationality and where someone lives, domicile, Section 104A.
Yeah, that one says unpublished works are protected no matter the author's nationality or domicile. And those are things tied to people, their legal connection to places, not software.
Then there's intent, right?
Yeah.
That came up with the definition of joint work in Section 101.
Right on. A joint work, legally, it needs two or more authors who, and this is key, intend to merge their stuff into one thing. And the court's like, machines, they don't have intent the way we think of it. They don't have minds like ours. So it's got to be humans agreeing in their minds to work together.
Not just side by side, but with a common goal.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got ownership, duration, inheritance, transfer, even nationality. It's not just one or two things. It's like the whole law is pointing back to humans. And didn't the court also look at how the Act talks about machines in general?
Oh, yeah. And that's super telling. Throughout the Act, whenever it talks about machines like computer programs, devices, processes, they're always tools that humans use, never creators themselves. They point to Section 102A, where it defines what can be copyrighted. It often mentions machines, but always humans using them to create. Then there's 117A about computer program owners' rights, and 401A about copyright notices, which might be on stuff made using machines. And the words they use around machines, owners, maintenance, service, repair, it all points to machines as tools in human hands.
Like a hammer or a paintbrush. Okay, so looking at just the words of the law, it really does seem like it's all about human authors.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent.
But they didn't stop there, did they? They went into the history, how the Copyright Office has actually done things.
Yeah, and turns out the Copyright Office has had this human authorship rule for a long time, way back to 1973, in their compendium of Copyright Office practices. They're like, no way is something an author's work unless it came from a human. And they haven't changed their tune since, through all the updates to that compendium. So the court saw this as more proof, like, see, it's always been this way.
1973, that's even before the current Copyright Act, right?
Before the 76 Act, yeah. And there's more. There are reports to Congress from even further back, like 1966.
Wow.
The Register of Copyrights, they're already wrestling with this human authorship thing, even back then, as computers are getting more advanced. Their big question was, is the work really from a human, with the computer as a tool? So it's not like this just popped up out of nowhere.
People have been thinking about this for decades.
Yeah, way before Dr. Thaler and his machine. And then there's KNTU, the National Commission on New Technological Uses of Copyrighted Works.
Catchy name.
Right. They formed in 74, and their big report in 78 said, computers are inert instruments. They don't do authorship. And the court pointed out this is all before the 76 Copyright Act. So Congress probably knew about this idea when they wrote the law.
So it wasn't an oversight or anything. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And even in 1980, when they changed the act to deal with computer programs specifically, they still kept that idea of machines as human tools.
Huge point. They could have redefined authorship then, but they didn't. So to the court, that silence means, yeah, we meant it. Humans are authors.
Okay, so the law itself, the history, it's a pretty strong case. But Dr. Thaler, he had his own arguments, right? How'd the court handle those?
Oh, yeah. He came prepared. So one thing he said was, look at the dictionary. Author just means someone who makes something. That doesn't have to be a human. And the court's like, okay, fair point, but you can't just take a dictionary definition and drop it in. You got to look at the whole act, how it all fits together. And they're like, if we use that super broad definition, the whole act gets weird. Machines having children, inheriting rights, machines with widows. It just doesn't work.
The system breaks down.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Didn't he bring up the work made for hire thing, Section 201B? Like maybe the AI is his employee, so he's the author.
He did, but the court wasn't buying it. They said work made for hire is about who owns the copyright, not who created the thing. It's like if you work for a company and write a song, the company might own it, but you still created it. And that initial creation, it still has to be by a human. The court even pointed out the word considered in that section. Like, it's a legal trick to figure out ownership, not to get around needing a human to create in the first place.
So it's a workaround for who owns the copyright, not a way to say a non-human can be the author.
Right. And then Dr. Thaler made a big point about how this human authorship rule could actually hurt AI-generated stuff, like stifle creativity in this whole new field.
Valid concern. How did the court address that?
They had a few responses. First, they said, look, this ruling doesn't mean you can't copyright stuff made with AI as long as a human's really involved in the creative process. They even mentioned the Copyright Office's own guidelines, which say you can register AI-involved works if the human's contribution is clear. And they touched on the Zarya of the Dawn case, which is all about where that line is between AI assistance and human authorship.
Yeah, that's a hot topic for
Yeah.
sure. But this case, it was all about the AI being the sole author.
Right, that was key. Dr. Thaler was very specific about that. Second, the court said, machines, they don't care about money. They don't need copyright to be motivated to create. So no copyright for AI wouldn't necessarily mean less AI-generated stuff. Third, they said, the people making and using AI, they're still going to want to create and get copyright for stuff they make with AI help where they're being creative.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And lastly, they said Congress has had tons of time since '76 to change the law to include AI, and they haven't. So the court's like, guess they're okay with how it is.
And they even brought up other cases, like Kelly v. Chicago Park Dist and that famous monkey selfie case, Naruto v. Slater. Both times the court said humans are authors.
Pretty consistent precedent there. So the court's saying if you want to change the law for AI, that's Congress's job, not ours. They even mentioned the Constitution, the part about Congress having power over intellectual property, and that Sony court case where the court basically said, let Congress handle the big policy stuff.
Exactly. The court's saying, we just apply the law as it's written. Congress can deal with the changing world. And to their point, the Copyright Office and Congress are already studying and writing reports about AI and intellectual property. So they're definitely aware of the issues.
It sounds like a lot more discussion is needed, even though this court made a pretty clear ruling. Oh, and Dr. Thaler, he had a couple other arguments, right? Like one where he said, well, the AI is my employee, so under work made for hire, I'm the author.
Yeah, he tried that, but the court shut it down quick. They said, look, no matter what, for anything to be copyrighted, it's got to be an original work of authorship by a human. The creative part has to come from a person.
Back to square one. And didn't he also try to argue that he's the author because he made and used the AI?
He did, but the court said, too late for that argument. Legally, he didn't bring it up early enough back at the Copyright Office stage, so they wouldn't consider it now.
There are rules to the game. Oh, and one last thing. I saw the court mention that the Copyright Office also said maybe the Constitution itself needs a human author. But the court didn't rule on that. Why not?
Yeah, they kind of left that hanging. And they explain it by saying, look, we already cited, based on the law itself, the Copyright Act needs a human author, so we don't need to get into the bigger constitutional question. It's a legal thing. If they can settle a case on narrower grounds, they avoid those huge overarching issues.
Keeps things tidy. All right, so after all this, what's the big takeaway for our listeners?
Here it is. Right now, under the 1976 Copyright Act, the way the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals reads it, you got to have a human to be an author. So anything made totally by AI, on its own, with no real human creative input, it can't be copyrighted in the U.S.
So this case gives us a really clear picture of how the law applies to AI right now. And hopefully, we've given you a good grasp of it all without too much legal jargon. But as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. AI is getting so advanced, so fast. What happens if we don't start recognizing AI as authors? What does that mean for our society, our economy long term? And what kind of legal or policy changes might we need to make to deal with this new reality? It's a huge question, and it goes way beyond just this one case. Definitely something to keep an eye on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.